Hi, I'm John Grooters. We are rightly appreciative these days of folks serving on the front lines. That's a term that comes from the battlefield, referring to those who put themselves most at risk in a time of real danger. My guest is the leader of a major homeless and hunger ministry, a place I call the real front lines. Today on No Shame.
Have no shame, no, we are not afraid, no shame of the gospel of his name. It's the power of God by which we all are saved. We need not be afraid, no shame.
So, today our guest is Dennis Van Kampen. Thanks for joining us. Dennis is the CEO of Trotter Ministries, which is an old one, 120-plus-year-old organization. And you can tell us more than I know, but it's dedicated, I know, to fighting hunger and homelessness with the tangible love of Christ. And it's in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And did I get that right?
You got it right. I have not been there 120 years, but sometimes it seems like it.
Well, the last time I was with you, I got a chance to sing some songs at a fundraiser for Trotter,
right.
And we were singing "Brother" by Need to Breathe, and Ron Hall was there, same kind of different as me, and that seems like a long time ago now, doesn't it?
Man, everything before COVID seems like it was a million years ago.
It really does.
Yeah.
The old normal when we were having banquets. Well, so thank you for being with us today. And I know that you got a lot of balls spinning, a lot of plates spinning, balls in the air, however you want to say it. You've got a lot of responsibility because Trotter in the city of Grand Rapids is a big deal. Tell me about it a little bit, how big a deal it is.
Well, we've been incredibly blessed. Over 120 years ago, there was an addicted man, a homeless man, an abusive man who named Trotter, who came to the point in his life in 1898, believe it or not, where the best thing he could think of to do for himself and his family in the world was to commit suicide. So in the middle of January, he took a train to Chicago got drunk, with the intent of walking off the pier into Lake Michigan. And he walked right past the Pacific Garden Rescue Mission, and there was a staff on duty that night, and they literally reached out and touched him and said, "Come to the mission." That night, he gave his life to the Lord. He got sober. He got his life straightened out. He ended up working at the mission, and in 1899, the city leaders here called him and asked him to start what was then the Grand Rapids City Mission. He ran that for 40 years before he died, and when he died, the board changed the name to Trotter. But in the 40 years that he was here, he started 68 other rescue missions around the country. And here's what's never changed. This is about demonstrating the compassion of Jesus Christ toward anyone experiencing homelessness, meeting them where they are without judgment, but with the love of Christ, and helping them walk forward to the life that God created them to live.
Now, Dennis, you haven't been in the kind of homeless relief ministry your whole life. Give me a little bit of the roadmap to get us started of how you got here and how kind of God maybe prepared you for this challenge.
Yeah, it's totally a God story. I mean, you could not, if I went to a career counselor, they would say that's not right. I grew up in Holland, wanted to be a police officer, went to the police academy at GR Junior College at that point. Got on the reserves for the Ottawa County Sheriff's Department and did that for 15 years. But while I was doing that, I took a job, which I thought was going to be just for the summer, as a camp health director for YMCA Camp Manitoulin. And in the middle of doing sort of the camp thing, the Christian camp thing, as well as the criminal justice thing, I was young and immature, but God was doing something. And he was literally saying, what do you want to do with your life? How do you want to impact people? And that led me on this course I stayed in camp ministry for 17 years, ended up in church ministry as a youth pastor for a few years at a couple of different churches. And then in the middle of that, I was teaching at Cornerstone and doing a bunch of things. And all of a sudden, about 8.5 years ago now, I found myself looking for that next thing, that next calling in ministry. And my wife actually brought me this ad for Vice President of Programs to Trotter. And I literally said to her, I'm not going to the inner city. I'm not going to Trotter. I'm not working with the homeless. When your wife and God have one plan and you have another, you're in trouble. You should just surrender. But the interesting thing is at that same time, I was praying the lyrics to a song that we do in church, and some of the lyrics were, God, break my heart for what breaks yours, everything I am for your kingdom's cause. Show me how to love like you have loved me. Well, be careful what you pray. Next thing I know, I apply for this job. I end up getting the job as the VP of programs at Trotter 8 years ago. Now I'm the CEO, and my job is part cop. It's part teacher, it's part camp director, it's part pastor. Everything that God brought me through for the past 30 years of my life are coming to fruition right now in this ministry.
You know, I've heard you say that running camps was a lot like running Trotter. You had to feed people, house people, and no one listened to you. Is that right?
You nailed it, man. That's exactly it. They just want to do what they want to do, but they want to make sure they get to the dining hall on time.
Well, there's something, and we'll get into what's going on these days, but as we each say to the Lord, maybe when we're young, and I guess like you did, God, use me. I'm available. I don't know exactly what it's going to be, and I might have my own ideas, which will probably include anything other than inner city. But you as training as a police officer, you as training as a teacher, you as working in church and youth ministry, you as working in camp. I mean, that's kind of why you say a career counselor might say, these are building blocks that are going to help you for something that I have for you down the road. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And now I find myself drawing on all of those skills, all of those experiences, and God somehow using this crazy story and this crazy journey in a guy like me to help lead this ministry. And you know what? He's blessing. And I learned a long time ago that, you know, when you hold on to things in your life very tightly, whether it's your career, whatever it is, when you hold on really tightly, what you're really doing is you're squeezing God out. And what I've learned to do in my life is whether it's my marriage, my family, my career, but to open my hands and acknowledge that everything's God, including my life, and just try and follow Him. And that's when the blessing happens. Not the easy times, but that's when the blessing happens. So, yeah.
Well, that's great. Dennis, I mean, no matter what we're doing, God's not going to waste what He has planted in you. You know, I'll probably do that song you just sang Sunday now that He put it in my head and it's rattling around in my brain. But
I know.
But the other song that, you know, He who began a good work in you is faithful to complete it. There's everything that you have been given, taught, equipped, learned, banged your knee, skinned your nose. Man, if it's surrendered, it can be used. So Trotter, just for people that aren't familiar with West Michigan or Trotter, what's the size of this organization? This isn't just like 6 people in a little food line, is it?
Yeah, it's really not. We're the second largest homeless services provider in the state, second behind the Gospel Rescue Mission in Detroit. We're about a $10 million a year organization. We have 164 employees, give or take. And we serve over the course of the year, just through our shelter services, we serve over 4,200 unique individuals every year. So on any given night, men, women, children, youth, anyone, on any given night, we can have, depending on the weather outside, 450 people there, men, women, and children, as little as literally infants that were born last week.
So when people use the phrase, sometimes folks fall through the cracks in our society, if they've fallen through the cracks, you're still a level below. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's absolutely fair. And, you know, one of probably the most important things, John, that I've learned in my 8 years at Trotter is, you know, I grew up in Holland, had a great family, great church, great upbringing. But one of the things that I think was true of me and is true of so many other people is kind of grew up with this idea that the playing field is equal for everyone, and all you need to do is pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and you can be whoever you want to be. And what I've learned at Trotter is that it's impossible to pull yourself up by your bootstraps if you don't have boots or if your straps are broken. And here's what I've learned. When you help somebody that doesn't have boots get boots, they'll go way farther than you thought they could. But you have to help them get boots because they don't have any. And that really has made all the difference.
Well, that's profound. I mean, that's profound. And I had parents and grandparents who were there when I didn't have any boots, and they gave me boots.
Yeah. That's right.
Some of these kids have not had parents or grandparents who love them and who burp them and who give them boots. And
That's right.
and you guys are there. So you're called and tasked to lead this organization, and you have been for these past 8 years. And we're recording this on June the 18th of 2020. And oh my goodness, what a 2020 it has been.
It has.
So, I don't even know where to start, but we talk about, there's been a fair amount of appropriate, I think, appreciation for what has been called frontline workers over the last 3 or 4 months, which are traditionally going to be those people who are in the medical fields and who are putting themselves at risk on the front line of hospitals or first responders. But tell me, is a homeless and hunger ministry like Mel Trotter, do you consider that the front lines?
Yeah, absolutely. I say this with humility. I was on a call last week with one of the things we do. We have medical and dental clinics, and we have partnerships with all 3 of the major hospital chains in Grand Rapids. And we're in a call with healthcare providers from all of the different hospitals talking about our public inebriate shelter, which is where people that are homeless and intoxicated, but they haven't broken the law and they're not sick, instead of going to jail or to the hospital, and they don't need to, they come to Mel Trotter. So we were on a call for that meeting, and one of the doctors at one of the hospitals who's pretty high up, he kind of paused the meeting for a minute, and he said, "Time out. We need to talk about COVID in Mel Trotter a minute." And he said, he was talking to me. He said, "You need to know that the entire medical community understands that if it hadn't been for Mel Trotter and what we did during COVID, the hospitals would have been overrun with homeless folks that needed to be admitted. And they literally had places like the Van Andel Arena reserved for hospitals, but they didn't have to enact that." And this doctor said, in large part because of the actions that Mel Trotter took in conjunction with Family Promise and Degage in the health department, to make sure that we were caring for people well. We started testing in March with the health department and the hospitals. And the bad news is 149 guests tested positive. The great news is that every one of them was caught early. Every one of them then no longer stayed at Mel Trotter, but they stayed in a facility that the healthcare provided their care, and or the health department. And once a doctor cleared them, they were allowed to come back. And what that did is that allowed us to keep Mel Trotter a safe place so that more people didn't get the disease. So that's a little bit, but I have to tell you, our nurses, our security staff, our case managers, they are heroes. If in my lifetime I do something half as heroic as them, I will have done something, because they came into an environment every day and put their own health and their family's health at risk. And we were doing PPP and we were testing people and all of that, or PPE, I should say. But they still put themselves at risk, and they did it because they love God and they love the people that we serve. So it's amazing.
In Jesus' day, it was called leprosy, right?
That's right. Yep.
And you had to shout out unclean, and Jesus there's a story in the Gospels about Jesus. Instead of running away from the lepers, he runs towards the lepers.
Yes.
And I don't know the circumstances of whether Jesus had been promised immunity, but I don't think he had. I don't think he had taken a vaccine that protected him against leprosy. Right. He did touch, according to the story, maybe you can tell the story, 10 lepers. What's your take on that?
Boy, I think it's a pretty amazing story about faith, and it's a pretty amazing story. I'm not saying that, if you contract a disease, it's because you didn't have enough faith. I'm not saying that at all. But what I am saying is that God calls us to go into the dark places. We are the light of the world. We are the salt of the world. We're not called to sort of sit in the Christian bubble where everything is safe. We're called to get into the gutters. One of the cool books that I read a long time ago by Craig Gross was called The Gutter. And it was about everything you talked about, the Jesus story, everything about where Jesus actually spent his time, and what does that mean for us today? So Jesus went to the lepers. He touched them. His faith carried him through that. And we can take a lot of solace in there. Now, I had some staff that actually did come down with COVID. But you know what? Every single one of them came back to the mission once they were recovered, and none of them came back with a bad attitude. they came back going, what happened while I was gone, because somebody needs my help. Again, if I can be half that heroic and frankly have faith that's half that strong, I'll be really happy.
None of them died? None of them passed away?
No, not a single one. So, in fact, most of the guests that tested positive, 93%, I think, of the guests that tested positive had no symptoms. And the only way we knew that they were positive was because we were being really proactive in testing. And then, they're like, I feel fine. We're like, yeah, I know you feel fine, but we need to have you come over here so you can be under the doctor's care. So.
Well, it's not a funny situation, but the kind of disease I want to catch is the one I don't know I have when I feel fine. That's
exactly.
Protect me from that. Now, everything was shut down in Michigan for 12, 13 weeks. I mean, so the first things to close besides hair cutters were, restaurants and hotels and basically everything you do. You gather people together, you house them and you feed them in groups.
Yep.
How did you handle this?
Well, the very first thing we did early in March, this was actually just God's timing. We're a part of a national network called Citygate Network, and there's about 300 gospel rescue missions across the country that are a part of it. And it just so happens that every March we go to D.C. and we spend time in meetings and spending time with our legislators and advocating and things like that. Well, we were in D.C. when this thing really hit. And so every briefing, in fact, it was funny, I talked to Bill Huizenga on a Monday, and he said, yeah, I'm not sure how serious this is. I talked to him again on Wednesday. He said, here's the briefings I've been in. This is going to be really serious. So what that did was it forced us to start talking together about what are we going to do when we get back to our missions. So we came back and initially instantly went to mandatory masks, mandatory hand washing, 6 feet social distancing, no more buffets or prepared food, anything like that. So we did that, and then we instantly started seeing far more numbers than we normally saw. A blessing was that we actually hired 6 people that lost their jobs in restaurants because we had a greater need in our food service department. And, a couple of them are still with us because they said, I don't want to go back to the restaurant. I think God's calling me here. So we did that. We got with the health department. We moved. We serve families at Trotter. We have 27 family rooms. And that is a partnership with Family Promise Ministry, and great organization. And we partner together around families. In that first week, Cheryl and I got together and we said, we can't keep kids in this building, so we don't know what's going to happen. So Cheryl found a donor to pay for hotels, and we moved families to hotels. So now we knew the kids were safe. And then every day, we biofog every day. I'm working at home today because my office gets biofogged on Thursday afternoons. We just kind of made the best decisions we could and spoke to the experts and prayed
So I want to mention 3 people you just mentioned. Craig Gross, who I haven't seen in a long time, but that's the guy with Triple X Church. Is that the same one? Yeah, this guy has been a great guy. I haven't seen him for a long time, but has been a leader in trying to help men overcome pornography addiction and free themselves. Fantastic. Bill Huizenga is our congressman from West Michigan. He's been a friend of mine for many, many years, and I'm glad to hear that he was able to kind of give you guys a heads up on what was coming. That's great. And then you just mentioned a person named Cheryl. Maybe you can unpack that a little bit.
Oh, sure, yeah. Sure, I'm acting like everybody knows everybody I know. Cheryl.
Well, I'm 2 for 3.
Yeah, that's right. Cheryl Shook is the CEO of Family Promise Ministries. They're a national organization, a national ministry that works in the space of family homelessness. Their Grand Rapids chapter, which is actually now working throughout West Michigan, she is the CEO for. So just a great ministry partner, a great friend, and the expert, in my opinion, certainly in West Michigan, if not Michigan, the expert in family homelessness.
So, Mel Trotter, tell me about physically where you're located.
Yeah, we're located, our main facility is on Commerce Avenue, a block off Division in Grand Rapids, so kind of in the Hartside neighborhood. We have been there we've been there since the 60s. And then we also have thrift retail outlets in Jenison, Sparta, Belding, Grand Rapids. So we have that. And then we also have, we just started this a few years ago. We were getting so frustrated with the housing crisis. If you're familiar with West Michigan, what's happened is literally 8 years ago when I started, one of our guests could get a job and they could move into a studio apartment on the bus line for maybe $700 or $800 a month, and they could make that work. Today, 8 years later, their job is still paying the same amount of money, but that exact same apartment is now $1,500, $1,600, $1,700 a month, and they can't make it. So we have a number of people working at Trotter that are employed full-time, but they can't afford housing. So that was frustrating us. And literally, I remember God like putting in this on my heart one day: stop complaining and start doing something. Okay. Well, what can I do? So a long story short, we now have several houses around Grand Rapids that we either lease from Intercity Christian Federation or we have bought outright. And then what we do is we take guests who have secured and maintained employment, and they move into these houses for up to a year. They pay rent, they pay utilities, and we do diminishing case management with them. In other words, we start pretty heavily, and then we back that off over time and work with them on a budget. And by the time, usually 6 to 9 months, they're ready to completely be on their own, and then they go to a place of their own. And then we move another guest into transitional housing. So really our reach is multiple counties in West Michigan.
So we're talking with Dennis Van Kampen. He's the CEO of Trotter Ministries in Grand Rapids, Michigan, a hunger and homeless operation that's been around over 120 years. And I just asked you physically where you were because a couple of Saturdays ago, our downtown Grand Rapids, like so many other cities across the United States, experienced what started out as protests and what devolved into riots. And we watched as windows were smashed and buildings were torched and police, cars were turned over, and all this happened. What was the scene at Trotter like? Did you guys get any damage, or what was everything happening from your perspective?
Yeah, we didn't get any damage. The closest damage or vandalism to us was probably about 2.5 blocks away. And even that wasn't significant. It was, I think, one window broken out that I saw in a restaurant about 2 blocks away. So we didn't have any of that. We were really concerned, though, that number one, it would extend to us. We were concerned about what might happen with our guests because here's the truth of homelessness. There's a lot of racial disparity. In Kent County, our county, the African American population is 13%. Across the country, including West Michigan, 92% of families that are homeless are African American, and about 55% of the singles that are homeless are African American. So those kind of things don't sort of just happen, right? So 1 in 7 black children born today will end up homeless at some point in their life. So we were really, pretty concerned about could sort of the unrest spill into the mission. It didn't at all. And I think that's, first and foremost, it's thanks to God. Trotter is a place, it's not a church, so I'm not going to say it's God's house, but it is a place where God is at work in the lives of people. And I think that was a part of it. Credit to the staff and their relationships with our guests. And a really cool thing happened on Sunday morning after the riots. Not a single staff member was involved with this. Sunday morning after the riots, a whole bunch of our guests asked for brooms, and they took brooms from the mission and they walked 4 blocks down to where the rioting was and they started cleaning up. And I'm like, that's a God story. The homeless are going to clean up the city. So, that's kind of what happened. And what's happened since then is it's provided us an opportunity with our staff and our guests to have really, real significant and deep conversations. And it's allowed people like me to listen more than I've listened before. And when you listen and hear somebody's heart, all of a sudden you can move forward together. So,
I was talking earlier in our conversation about are you on the front lines, and that was more as related to the COVID and the frontline workers for the health. But now we're facing these these tensions and these frustrations. You've even been a part of the police department. Can you be on the front lines of a hopeful future in race relations and in urban redevelopment and in police? I mean, can a Trotter be at the table for those kind of things?
I believe we already are. My predecessor, the CEO that hired me, Chico Daniels, I remember a lot of things that he said, but one of the things that he said most frequently is he would look at the staff and he would say, what if the revival that our town, our area needs starts at the little old mission on Commerce? What if the revival happens here? And that always stuck with me. And you know what? I think it's happening. I really do, because the mission is a place where we all have our faults. We all have problems, of course. But fundamentally, mission, when we think about, like Simon Sinek talks about, every organization should ask what their why is. Well, Mel Trotter's why is really simple. And a lot of your listeners and viewers are probably going to know exactly what I'm talking about. Our why is simply this. We believe that every single human being was made in the image of God. And they were made in the image of God by this God who loves them, has plans for them, died for them, and Paul in Ephesians says he's created in advance good works for them to do. So we can look at the people that walk through our building, or we can look at the panhandler on the street, and we can see their behavior, and nothing will ever change. And we can judge them by their behavior. Or we can look deeper and see them as someone made in the image of God that he loves and he has plans for, and we can meet them there, and that's how the world changes. So I think we are at the front lines. I feel totally inadequate to lead an organization like this that's at the front lines. That'll be one of my questions.
So did
for
Moses,
God.
Actually, now that you mention it. I mean, you're not the first.
I do like climbing mountains.
Oh, yeah, especially when they're on fire.
Right.
And then you come back and everything's gone crazy again, and everyone's got the Hawthorne golden calf out. Well, the call to the church right now, or to us who are a part of the kingdom at least, it's pretty easy to take a side right now. It's pretty easy to see what's wrong with whoever you disagree with, and it's pretty easy to feel your sort of enemy quotient kind of bubbling up. I mean, and yet that's not who we want or claim to be. We are forgiven people ourselves as Christians. Christ forgave us. So the gospel is that we will forgive others in the same way. And yet, how do we do that?
Well, you know what? So I'm going to sound like, I've got this all together, and I don't, because I'm working it out for my own life and have been for 52 years. But here's what I'm learning. First of all, let's take it at its core root. Nobody is against protests. You're against protest of people that are protesting something you disagree with, right? So you don't like the protest of people that are saying Black Lives Matter, but you're okay with the protest of haircuts on the lawn of the Capitol in Lansing. Well, see, your problem isn't protest. Your problem is whether or not you agree with the issue. So we first have to be honest with ourselves about what our true problem is. Part of that honesty with yourself is, I'm going to be really vulnerable and share something I've learned during this racial disparity about myself. If we would have done this 6 months ago, John, and you would have said, I think I know the answer to this question, Dennis, but are you racist? I would have said, no, I'm not racist, and I would have done what everybody did. I would have named all the friends that I have and all of this kind of stuff. Here's what I've learned in talking to people, and I had one, I won't go into the long story, but I had one profound interaction with somebody that doesn't work at Mel Trotter, but she works in a different organization, and we've worked together on projects for years. And through this, I had this profound conversation with her, and here's what I learned about myself. I'm not prejudiced against anyone that looks like me, talks like me, works like me, and values the things that I value. Black, white, doesn't matter. If they look like me and act like me, I'm not prejudiced. I can't say I'm not prejudiced against people that think differently than me, dress differently than me, and act differently than me. Well, that's something I need to confess to the Lord, because that person is made in the image of God. And why does somebody have to be like me for me to give them value? So that's like really vulnerable. I haven't said that publicly to anyone, so I don't know.
Well, this is a private conversation. Nobody listens to this podcast, so you're safe.
Exactly. The other thing I would say real quick is this was put on my heart years ago by God, and I think there's so much to it. When we talk about Jesus Jesus did two things in his last hours of life that I think we could learn a lot from in this time as Christians and people in the kingdom. The very first thing he did was he humbled himself, as Paul says in Philippians 2. He got on his knees and he washed the feet of Judas, his betrayer. He didn't wash everybody else's feet and skip Judas because Judas was going to betray him. He washed Judas's feet too. And then when he was hanging on the cross, the second thing that he did, he could have done anything. And instead what he did was he looked down at the very people killing him and said, Father, forgive them because they don't know what they're doing. My prayer for my life is that when I'm being abused, when I'm being tortured, when I'm being ridiculed, that instead of striking back, I would echo the prayer of Jesus and say, Father, forgive them, and that I would wash their feet. That spirit of humility, I think the kingdom would explode if all of Christ's followers started living that. I mean, people would be like banging on our door at 3 a.m. going, tell me about Jesus. I don't know. That's just what I'm learning.
Love your enemies. If your enemy is hungry, give him bread. If your enemy is thirsty, give him water to drink. I'm doing a new movie right now. That's a line from Sabina Wurmbrand, and she's talking to this Nazi, and he says that's ridiculous. And she herself had said that's ridiculous until Christ came into her life, and now she says, yeah, by me it's impossible, but Christ in me, I can do all things.
Amen. Yeah.
I do not understand how to love a true enemy. And there's a difference between prejudice, prejudging. Okay.
Yes.
It doesn't mean we can't have opinions or judge evil things. So, for example, you were saying we all, the right to protest is a First Amendment guarantee unique to this country.
That's right.
You cannot protest the government in North Korea. You cannot protest the government in China. You cannot protest the government. So as we are protesting injustices, if we destroy the culture and rein into a Marxist ideology, there will be no more protests. I hope we all realize that. There's going to have to be legitimate discussion and intelligent conversation and looking at history and listening with humility in order to not make things worse, in my opinion.
Right. Everyone has a right in this country to peaceful protest. No one has a right to burn down a building and burn down a car or cause harm to another person. But everybody has a right to peaceful protest, and whether we agree with them or not, we should support their right to do it.
We were thinking the disciples and Jesus himself lived in a time of kind of some nasty political circumstances. They were occupied by Rome, and they were restricted in so many ways. And yet you don't read a lot in the New Testament, do you, about the disciples working to bring about political change? That kind of wasn't the avenue that was available to them or wise for them, and yet they ushered in the kingdom of God, and it changed the world. Yeah, that's encouraging to me.
Me too. I've been in my mind. I've been seeing it as if you look at sort of the political spectrum. That was bad. If you look at the political spectrum, right, and you Democrat over here and Republican over here and whatever else in the middle, I think it's a tool of the devil to get Christ followers to think only on that plane. I think what you're saying about the disciples and even Jesus in the Gospels is we're called to a higher plane. It doesn't mean that you don't care about, you don't take political positions, you don't vote. Of course we do. But we're called to a higher plane that transcends right, left, whatever it might be.
Well, you're leading a large staff on the front lines of a pandemic where we've been told the way to fight this pandemic is literally to stay home.
Yep.
For your clientele, Dennis, that doesn't really work, does it?
It doesn't. We're the closest thing to a home most of them have. And, they have, I've had people call me and go, why can't you, their words, why can't you keep the homeless from standing on the corner? Well, because they don't have a backyard to go to. And not only that, but I'm not their boss, right? And they have need for interaction like everyone else does. So what we do is we meet them and we try to explain to them what's going on. A fair amount of the people that have been homeless for years are mentally ill. They don't understand pandemic. Their biggest concern is, will I get dinner tonight? Not, will I contract a disease and have to be put on a ventilator next week? So we have to meet them where they are. And so staying home is an interesting concept for our guests.
And this is global too. I was talking with Greg Kelly recently. He's the executive director of the World Mission Organization, and he'd been on. I was with him. We were on the phone with a guy from India, and he was saying, over here, these people are a lot more afraid of starvation than they are of COVID because they are starving to death in these countries like India and Indonesia and Guam and all these places because the economy completely shut down. And at the best, they were many of them were day laborers who would sell a few bars of soap, and that was that day's meal. So even in America, that's not only a foreign issue. You're really talking about a population that tonight's dinner is got to prioritize.
Yeah, that's exactly right. They're not. I can't tell you how many times we've heard from people on the street when we talk to them about COVID that is not even in their top 5 concerns. Their top 5 concerns are the things that you and I, and probably the majority of your listeners, take for granted. Water, food, safe place to sleep tonight, boots, right?
Right.
So sometimes it's hard to not view people from our lens, our reality, and what we have to do is think about what their reality is, and then go from there.
Let me ask you a quick question about leadership, because you're leading a large staff in a big group. And my observation, at least with my grandkids, is that it's a lot easier to break things than it is to build things. It takes a long time to build that tower, and bam, it comes down in no time at all. So a staff and the unity of a staff and a commonality of mission and purpose take a long time to build. I would imagine leadership through this time, first through COVID, where your staff is understandably going to have some concerns for their own safety. And then I'm just going to take a wild guess that not everyone on your staff has the exact same opinion about everything. So how do you lead in those two situations? How has it gone? How have you done it?
Yeah. Boy, it's a lesson that I try to learn every day. I would say a couple of things. First of all, I learned early on, don't hire for skill, hire for the things that can't be trained. Right now, that might be different if I'm going to go have brain surgery. I probably want to have a pretty skillful surgeon. But for most things in life, I can't train heart, I can't train attitude, I can't train relationship with Christ, I can't train a heart for the poor. So I have to hire those things. So we are now saying no to some highly skilled people that don't have those things right. Because we can train those things. The second thing is when it comes to differences, political, theological, whatever, the goal every single day is to keep orienting people and keep focusing on them on not the things that divide us, but the things that unite us. So one of the changes we made a few years ago was to our application. We had a statement of faith that was really long, longer than any church I've ever seen. And if somebody really read it all, and if they really signed that they believe it all, it would have meant that our staff was a pretty small percentage of the Christian population in West Michigan. And we're like, wait a minute, do we really care if their church, the worship pastor has a suit on with an organ, and the other person's church, it's blue jeans and an electric guitar? Do we really care about that at Trotter? Do we really care what their view on the end times is? What do we really care? What we really care about is Jesus. And we kind of narrowed it down to the Apostles' Creed. That's the core. And since we've done that, we keep coming back to, listen, this is really simple at Trotter. It's about the life-transforming message and power of Jesus Christ for everyone, period. And if you can get around that, then I don't really care what your particular worship music style is at your church this Sunday. And I don't really care if you believe in rapture or whatever, right? This is what I care about, because we're not trying to do the church's job. So we've had guests that have gone, they come to Christ and they want us to baptize them, which is great. And for a while, some staff were like fighting me, going, we need to do this. I'm like, no, we don't. Because we're not the church. And here's the thing. Their long-term sustainability is connected to being connected to a church, not Mel Trotter. So the best thing we can do if somebody wants to be baptized is connect them to a church that has a community of believers that will walk with them for the next 50 years of their life. Not Mel Trotter, where they'll leave, hopefully, when they get a job and never come back unless they're a board member or a volunteer or something. Right? So I know kind of a rambling answer to yours, but I think that's leadership is the right people around the main thing, and then it's communication. We learned in COVID that I thought people were getting sick of how much leadership was communicating with the staff. Here's what we've learned. They've said, when COVID's done, can you keep doing that? Because we've never felt as informed about what's going on in the mission as we have during COVID. Well, guess what? We're going to keep over-communicating because apparently people like that. So,
Some good things can come out of this experience, maybe many good things. Yeah. Obviously, there's been a lot of trouble. It's a beautiful thing to hear the way God has used you as a leader. And both your humility and your conviction, Dennis, come through strongly. If you're listening to this podcast, listen, I don't do this. I don't think I've done this before. I just encourage you, if you're listening, to lift up this brother, Dennis, and pray for him and for his staff that on the front lines of ministry and then any other ministries that are doing the same kind of work that you know of. We can't have all the leaders. There's a lot of fantastic people, that I know that do this kind of work from coast to coast. You're sort of speaking on their behalf today for so many of them. Let's be in prayer for those ministries that are on the front lines, working with the homeless and the hungry, specifically praying by name for their leadership. And then when it comes to Mel Trotter, you guys are supported by donations. As far as I know, you don't charge for beds overnight. So if we want to participate in the ongoing ministry and work of Mel Trotter, how do we do it?
Yeah, thank you for that. And one thing real quick, if you're listening around the country and want to know about a great Christian rescue mission in your area or as close to you as possible, go to citygatenetwork.org. There's a tab where Find a Mission near me. If you're in Holland, Michigan, it's going to be Daryl Bartlett at the Holland Rescue Mission. Great person, great ministry. If you're in Kansas, it's going to be somebody else. For Mel Trotter, go to meltrotter.org. And, here's what I tell people because it's true. There's 3 ways that you can help. The most important way by far is you can pray. This is ministry, this is hard work, and the closer we get to being who God is calling us to be, the more the devil attacks us. So please pray for us. Second, if you're nearby and you want to volunteer, you don't even have to be an expert in anything. If you just can share your story and listen to somebody else's, come volunteer. And lastly, to your point, and thank you for that, we are donation driven. And if God puts on your heart to share some of your blessing with us, then it's like the feeding of the 5,000. 2 loaves and a couple of fish can go a long, long way when God blesses it. So we would invite you to do that.
Well, you guys, if you're watching or listening, and gals, you can see that, again, you make yourself available to God. You never know where you're going to end up. Dennis, I'm so glad that you're the person chosen for this hour and for this time at Mel Trotter. Might you be encouraged, appreciated. Might you be sustained through your challenges and lifted up high by your successes. And thanks for being on the No Shame podcast. We say it's at the intersection of faith and culture. We talk to a lot of media types, but I think the ministry that you're doing is right at that intersection of faith and culture. Thank you for spending some time with us today.
Awesome, John. Thank you so much, and so good to reconnect with you, man. I've been a fan since we were both a lot younger, and I used to go to the Hope College Chapel stuff. So thank you, my brother. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we were younger once. That's true. All right. God bless you, man.
All right, you too.
Thanks.
See ya.
Have no shame, no, we are not afraid, no shame of the gospel of his name. It's the power of God by which we all are saved. We need not be afraid.
No Shame is a weekly podcast where John Grooters discusses life at the intersection of faith and culture with all kinds of interesting and inspiring guests. Subscribe to the podcast today by going to johngrooters.com, select the podcast tab, and hit subscribe. Don't miss any of these life-giving conversations.